Good evening. My name is John Ferris with deadbackandburied.com here at the World Horror Con 2011 in Austin, Texas. Today I have a very special guest with me, John Gorumba, who has published his first novel, and we're going to get into speaking with him a little bit about the convention and about his first novel. So John, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself. When you became inspired to write, your influences, and so forth, if you don't mind.
Well, born and raised in New Orleans. I guess what started me out to being interested in writing was comic books. That was the first place. So, when you're a kid, before you read a novel, the first thing you're going to read usually is a comic book. Mm-hmm. And my brother was a comic collector, so, before I could read, there was already, and he's 7 years older than me, so there was already a stack of comic books waiting to be read. So, I read those for quite a few years. The first thing I thought I wanted to be is like, oh, comic book author, comic book artist, because I did have nominal talent at drawing as well as writing that I never really pursued. But that's for quite a long time, probably through grade school into high school. I think high school is where it switched from comics to novels, that I actually wanted to write a book. So all through grade school, I thought I was going to be like a comic book artist or writer, artist of comic books, and I would sit there and draw stuff all day long, and, instead of get out of PE, never bring my uniform, and just sit there and draw all day long. I did that through junior high. I was getting, incompletes for gym class because I would never bring my stuff so I could sit there and draw all day while they threw basketballs at each other's faces. Somewhere, I think my last year of junior high, starting high school, was where I read Stephen King's It.
Another Stephen King fan.
Yeah, and so that it was recommended to me, and I read that. I remember going to KB, which was a drugstore, and buying that. And I'm this little kid, I'm in junior high, and I put the book on the table, and she looks at me, and she's like, "You gonna read this? This is big." Because if you've seen it, it looks like a miniature phone book.
Absolutely.
And so to see a little kid coming by, this was kind of shocking. And I remember starting to read it. So I may have purchased this before junior high because I had started to read it, but I think maybe I was a little bit too young. Mm-hmm. So I put it down. So it was junior high. I'm trying to think if it's 6th grade or 7th grade, probably 7th grade, that I got into reading it, and I was hooked. And I remember, you watch movies up until then, and you read comic books, which are good, but those are 10-minute adventures. You read that in 10 minutes and you're done. Mm-hmm. Reading for hours and hours and hours, and it just ignites your imagination. And I think it was the perfect story for me to read because, as you know, it's all about, half of it's about children. Mm-hmm. So while they were a little bit younger than me at the time, I could identify with it so clearly. And so it had such a profound effect on me when I finished that novel. I remember walking around for a week afterwards. Walking around the school, and all I could think about was those characters in the novel because I just never experienced like a 1,000-page journey like that. It blew me away. Mm-hmm. Of course, so you instantly become a Stephen King fan and you devoured his whole line.
Everything that came out.
Yeah, devoured his whole line. But I remember at that point was where I dreamt up doing the switch from like the comic book stuff. And it's like, oh, I could write a novel. I could do that. And I remember the first thing I came up with, I had my little notebook, and I'd sit there and draw little notes, draw little scribbles and stuff. It was a, pathetic copy of It, note for note about some creature, like, it takes the shape of things you're afraid of. You're a kid, you haven't gotten there yet. So, but that was the beginning, and I tore through the Stephen King line well through into high school, and you get very focused on one thing at that age. So it was Stephen King forever. Until I had gotten through most of his line before I started to branch out. I think the first thing I branched out with was Clive Barker, probably because Stephen King recommended him. He had that famous quote about him being the future of horror, which was probably much of a curse to him as it was a plus, because having to live up to that. But through Clive Barker, then I would slowly start to branch out. Like I bought a Dan Simmons book, and then you branch out. Now I branched out beyond horror. It took me a long time, probably before I got into college, before I branched away from horror, starting to read other things, like Cormac McCarthy. I just read The Road recently, which floored me again. But you have to branch out of the genre. Anybody who's an aspiring writer, if all you're reading is horror, everything I was writing up until that point it becomes copycat stuff. You're only reading horror writers, and all the good horror writers, all they read is other stuff. I mean, they still read horror, but they read other stuff, other literary novels, other genres, and that's what makes you a better writer. If you want to be a crime writer or a horror writer and all you're reading is that genre, your stuff is going to be a sad pastiche of that. It's not going to be anything new because you don't have anything new to pull from. So
now you've written some short stories. You and I talked before, and you were to put it very lightly, not happy with some of the short stories that you wrote, whether they were experimental, but you still submitted them. Yeah,
well, when you write them, you're happy with them at first when you write them, but they keep getting rejected. And looking back on them, when you're in the act of writing something and you look at it, it looks fine. When you look back at it years later, you're like, holy crap! No wonder it got rejected in 20 different places. It wasn't ready yet. It wasn't good. And I had a lot of development to do. A lot of that stuff I wrote, I was sticking myself, I was segregating myself to only horror novels. And so I think my work was suffering because of it. It was just a learning process. So I went through quite a few horror short stories. I don't know how many I wrote, And I would submit them to all the different magazines, Cemetery Dance, and all the other ones. You do when the internet came along and got on the internet, and you do research to find the different magazines to submit to. But you rack up a pretty good string of rejections, which is the normal process. I mean,
Absolutely.
if you don't have a string of rejections, you're not a writer. So
you're not trying.
Yeah, you're not trying, because I mean, all the best writers have strings of rejections. It's not like instant. Oh yes, Stephen King, his first story was not instantly accepted. He got his own. He talks about it in all of his books on writing and stuff. You get those string of rejections. You have to be proud of them. Because, I mean, I would never have gotten here if I hadn't gone there. And I guess.
Well, John. Let's talk about World Red for a minute.
Okay.
Let's talk about what gave you the idea. What inspired you to start writing World Red?
Well, I was friends with RJ with Creeping Hemlock Press. I knew him because their press has been around for a while, but the deadline is brand new.
Okay.
So, I've been able to experience from the outside all his trials and tribulations as he's getting this press going. And he told me about this. And then so he's like, look, I'm starting this line, and I'm accepting submissions from everyone. And he knows I've tried to pitch a few ideas to him here and there for novel ideas or novella ideas. And he was never really taken with any of them. So, he's like, no, it's just not right for us. It's not right for what I'm trying to do and get this thing going. But when he told me about the zombie one, I just, you sat, brainstormed, and I found my take on it. And when I pitched it to him, it caught his attention. It caught him. It was he had already had a couple of writers signed up, and other people who are coming. Who I don't know if he wants me to mention them or not. But he had people in the pipeline, and he had their pitches. And I guess I was filling a spot for a type of zombie novel that he didn't have, and it really just caught his attention. So I sent him from the pitch, an outline and a few sample chapters, and he liked it. So he said, "Run with it. I think we're going to do this."
Wonderful. Talk about the premise a little bit about it.
The premise was understanding that there is an absolute glut of zombie novels as I'm about to embark on as wanting to do a zombie novel, and with all the movies and the new resurgence, it's even though there's a lot more to come, like World War Z is ramping up to get done. You're almost feeling a saturation point where it's just there's so much zombie stuff everywhere, and you're starting to see people get sick of it, even because not that the genre is dead. No genre and no subgenre is ever truly dead. It's just too much of the same coming out. Not to say that you can't write a straight Romero zombie novel and have it be great. There's just a lot of the same. It's in a lot of garbage flooding, so that the cream is getting buried under all this other stuff. There's so much value, people start to tune the whole thing out. But I gave him a different idea, and the whole thing was like my tagline that we came up with at the top was "There are no rules," and that is the basis of the entire novel. I take all of the zombie mythology, and I kind of shatter it all, because it almost feels like zombies. They're a great monster. They're a great catalyst.